Welcome to the New Monastics podcast, where we'll be discussing all aspects of the contemplative life and interspirituality in the context of modernity. On each episode, we will choose a topic to explore with one of today's leading teachers or thinkers. The New Monastics podcast is a project of Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality, which is dedicated to the emergence of a newly conceived contemplative life of embodied spirituality and sacred activism. Welcome to the New Monastics podcast. I'm Nathaniel, co-founder of Charis Foundation for New Monasticism and Interspirituality, and I'll be one of your hosts.
And I'm Daniel, your other host for the show.
Today we have my friend Alejandra Warden, an educator, interspiritual teacher, and founder of the Essential Oneness Feminine Wisdom Project.
Alejandra offers talks, workshops, and retreats on the sacred feminine, dream interpretation, and interspirituality in the United States and South America.
Born and raised in Argentina, Alejandra founded and directed her own Montessori school before moving to the United States with her husband and 2 children. Today, she lives in Washington State, where, along with her aforementioned work, she's a mentor in the Spiritual Paths Interspiritual Meditation Network and works closely with Charis Foundation.
We're so excited to have you on today, Alejandra. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Earlier this year, you published a book that I just had the pleasure of reading, in which you detail the original experiences that inspired your current teaching. We'd like to discuss some facets of that teaching on the sacred feminine today. And to get us started, I'm wondering if you could give us a brief overview of the book, which is titled Remembrance, A Vision of the Sacred Feminine and the Renewal of the Earth.
Okay, thank you. Well, the book, for me, is a fairly precious book in a certain way because it's not really my book. It's the teachings that I receive, and I try to be as faithful as possible when I had to bring them into the world, because some of the visions that I received were similar to each other. So I had to also see how will that be able to be brought together. As I didn't mention probably that the book is based on visions. It's based on a period of my life of 7 months in which I received these teachings from what I call the essence of the feminine. That could be, I never really knew where it was a goddess or the feminine archetype or a feminine principle, but for me, it was a universal cosmic feminine that expressed and manifested itself in all the realms of reality, in particular in our world, in whatever is air, land, and water, and also in the universe as a cosmic, universal feminine, and also in other realms of reality, like the angelic realm and others. So when I received these visions, in the beginning, they were pretty difficult for me to understand because I come from a very psychological-oriented home in which sometimes visions are not what you would consider okay, fully okay. So I had a little bit of a resistance. I would say a lot of resistance. But then I actually understood that they were teachings for me, to understand something about the feminine that I was not aware of. And that is true. So I started doing what I was told, which was to write everything I heard and I understood and the places I visited. And when I did that, I did this always thinking that they were teachings for myself. Only at the end of the period of 7 months, and actually in the last vision, I was told that were not just for me, but they were meant to also be shared with others. At that point, I realized that I couldn't do it. And it took me 20 years to be able to start considering bringing it out into the world and fulfilling my promise, because I did say that I would do it. One of the things that I was confronted was, is this something that I want just to share? This is what I seen, heard, and experienced as like kind of a messenger kind of thing? Or is this something that if I have to learn it, that's what I understood, that they were for me originally. If I have to learn it, then I need to actually become those lessons, those classes, those messages, those teachings. And that's what I actually decided to do. Also to be able to honor what I had received, because the more I thought about it, the more I'm meditating upon them, the more I try to find ways to express them to the world, I realized that there was much more than just a simple external vision, that there were teachings within teachings within teachings, that as I continue furthering my personal journey into the feminine, I started understanding more and more. And as a matter of fact, I think I continue to learn from them. So it's still a process. And I've been doing this process for the last 20 years. By now, it's more than 20 years.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you say in the book, the visions ended in 1997. And so here we are. It's 25 years later, and the book was published earlier this year. And you've now shared the kind of contents of these visions that you received. And I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit more of an overview of the nature of those visions. You said that you felt like they were teachings directly from the feminine essence. Can you share with our listeners just a bit about the general content of the visions that you received?
Sure. The first thing that I had to understand was that there was a possibility for the earth to be seen as simply paradise. That my vision, and in great part the Western world vision of the world, as something that is an object to be used and to take advantage or enjoy, but for a personal and almost egotistic way. There was another way, and that was that life itself was a miracle, that the earth was paradise, and we needed to remember that I personally had forgotten much of what the true feminine was, and not just me, but in general, at least the Western world had forgotten. So it started by showing me the earth as paradise, and then the teachings went into this history of the cosmos, the history of creation, how everything was created out of love, how love was the essence of creation, the embodiment of the essence, the embodiment of the spirit of life. And that because it was loved, love was also related to a kind of consciousness, and that love as consciousness was evolving. And the latest aspect of that evolution was through us. One of the things that I was told was about the bearers of remembrance. And the bearers of remembrance were those individuals and communities who remember where they come from, where they are going, and why are we here. And in part of the reason that we're here is to be the eyes and the voice and really the hands of that essence. People call it God or life or whatever name you call it, the single spirit that embedded everything in creation. And because of that, we had a function, we had a mission as humanity. And that part of that mission was being the eyes to be able to witness life and to bless life, because we are the embodiment really of the consciousness of the spirit of life. And that's why we are needed. And that's the actual hope also for humanity. Then the visions go into really different realms of reality. For example, I was shown how love starts embodying through the vegetable kingdom, so the plant kingdom, how the seeds, for example, or the different aspects of the plant, the different parts, they fulfill a function that always has relationship to embodying greater and greater capacities of love. And how that love also incarnated in the animal kingdom, for example. So how the different species us and the different classes, the idea is that they try more and more to manifest different qualities of love. For example, the care of the baby, how to take care of it, how to protect it. And one of the things that for me were so interesting, which I never thought before, is how nature actually helps us to incarnate love. For example, one of the things that it was really touching for me was to see how water could become the caretaker of the future species, of the future creature. For example, in the fish, you have the baby fish not being taken care by the parents, but actually lives in the water. And the water is the environment that provides for everything for the little creature to be able to live and survive. And how that eventually becomes almost incarnated in the animal. For example, you have the frog, for example, the typical frog, there are many kinds also, but the typical one, you would say that it produces a substance of her own to protect the eggs. And then you eventually see how the animal is it's able to hold the baby inside their body or protect it with the wings, how the warmth of love becomes the wings of the birds, how that becomes incarnated afterwards in the mammals, and how the milk of the mother becomes a nurturing and loving substance that not only embraces with the body, but actually allows for the baby to come in contact with the external world while still connected to the essential aspect of the water from what they come from when they were in the belly, for example. So to see love expressed in so concrete ways, such concrete ways, for me, it brought me to a different understanding of love as consciousness and of the meaning of love. And it took it out from the idea of love as being just being in love or just human love and human connections. It brought I don't know how to say it, but a variety of ways in which love can be expressed, not just through a sexual act or through a way of being in love with, but just for caring, attention, dedication, concentration. There are many qualities of love that I didn't think of them as love, but then suddenly they were all related to that consciousness, and in us to be aware of all these connections, to be aware that we are the means of this love is extremely valuable as a lesson for life.
Alejandra, you waited many, many years to write this book. And I know from our own conversations that there was some level of trepidation in talking about having had visions, especially visions as strong as this, which kind of took over your life for a while. So maybe it'd be interesting for you to give us the context in which, the story around how these visions came and where you were at your life and what happened.
Thank you. As I said, I was coming from a very psychological oriented home. My godmother was a psychologist. She actually was one of the ones that created the career in Argentina. So since I was very little, she was always doing all the testings on me. Pretty much I was like a little practice place where she could develop all her theories and all her teachings and learning. One of those is that visions are a no-no. So
that's too bad.
Exactly. So I had just arrived from Argentina. I had two schools with Montessori and developed that system in my country because it didn't exist there. I had been teaching for 15 years in my schools, And I had become pregnant. And out of that, my husband, Carson, was also a Montessori teacher. We realized we were not going to make it economically. So he decided to study law. For that, because he's from the United States, his Spanish was not enough. So we had to come to the States. We went to Virginia, University of Virginia Law. My kids at that point had been born in Argentina. They were 2 years old. And we came together and we were kind of in shock in a new country. It was nothing that we have thought. I always thought that I was going to raise my kids in Argentina and that the United States was for me to come and visit my in-laws and family members, or visiting the country, but was not a place that I was going to come and live. So it took us a while to get adapted. But about 6 months after our arrival, what happened is that I started having what I thought it was a kind of a breakdown. Concretely, what happened is that as we were walking on the streets, Christmas was coming. It was right at the beginning of December. Everything was decorated. My kids were so excited about the lights because in Argentina, we didn't have that kind of decorations or that level of decorations in the streets. And I couldn't see the joy in that. Everything was sad for me and sadder and sadder. And it was like everything didn't have any meaning, that what I was looking at was kind of a world made of plastic or cardboard. Sometimes it felt to me that I was looking at cardboard images. When I arrived home, the feeling disappeared. But as soon as I would get out, it would become the same. I didn't fully understand what was happening. It was sad for me. I also remember something that I didn't write in the book, but I wrote it in the Spanish version. And that was the houses. I come from a country in which the houses are really built on the ground, made of brick. We don't have buildings with a frame of wood. And we don't have houses that have underneath like air, airing spaces to put all the piping below. So when I was walking, I was looking to me, I said, I'm pretty ungrounded probably. And the houses are as ungrounded as me. It was almost like I was paralleling my state of feeling, how I was feeling with the environment. I started wondering if I would be dying or if something would be really, I would having a breakdown, that something was going to be really, really bad with me. And again, it was like in this environment made of cardboard for me or made of plastic, that I was associating over and over my personal state with I was seeing outside. One of these days, I was crossing the street to take my kids to the park when basically everything went upside down. Everything became like white. Everything dissolved around me. Before that, there were cars passing by. I couldn't hear the cars anymore. The trees dissolved. I could feel my children, but I couldn't see them. The whole environment dissolved before me, and my feet felt that I was standing in space, in the void. I couldn't feel the ground. I had a sense that I was dying. I really thought that I was dying. And when I thought this, I felt something inside me. It's not a burning, but it was a sense like something was exploding inside me. And it was like a mute or like a scream or like a cry. More, it was like a cry that was inside me but couldn't be voiced. It didn't have an outer voice. And when I felt that, I knew that if I would have died in that very moment, that my life would have been a wasted life, would have been a life without meaning. And the reason for that was because I had not remembered. In that very moment, I didn't even understand what was happening because I never had seen my life as not having any meaning. On the contrary. And I didn't know what I had to remember. I didn't even understand what I was saying. Then I understood much later that kind of voices that tells you something that leaves you kind of out of whatever you think you know. is actually the voice of the soul, right? It's really something that is calling you from a different place, and it needs to break through your ego patterns and your belief systems, and it needs to destroy something in order to be able to come through. But in that moment, it really brought me into what I consider a dark night of the soul, because I had no idea what remembering meant, and what it meant that my life had not the meaning that it had to had. So it brought me really to my knees. And then I got sick at one point. I started writing in my diary whatever I thought that I had to remember. I also pretended that I was talking with my best friend, and I was telling her what was happening, something that I really couldn't do, because in those days the mail was extremely slow, and otherwise it was extremely expensive to send mail to Europe or to my country. My best friend was at that moment living in Germany. So I had to pretend, and I wrote over and over what I was experiencing. And my feeling was a dark night. And at that point, I didn't even know that a dark night of the soul, anyone can have it. My Christian background was telling me that only saints or people somewhat related to deep religious experiences were the ones that could have this experience of dark night of the soul. But now I know that is fairly common for many, many people. So that was the experience. And then from then, one day when I got sick, I had this indication somehow that I needed to have a fast. And I didn't want to do a fast, because at one point in my life I had done a fasting, and I started seeing all sort of psychic phenomena, and I was very resistant to go back to there. But I did it anyways, because it felt that it was a very strong indication. And on the third day, I had an experience, which actually is the beginning of the experience of all the visions, which was a direct contact with a saintly being that actually brought a shift in consciousness in me. And that's the main reason why it's so difficult for me for so many years to speak about these things, because I could feel that everything could be misused, not just by others, but even for me. It was like I really needed to feel sure that I could be a clean, empty messenger for this book and this message, that there was nothing of me that was going to be touching it in any way. And the experience was so strong and so powerful that I could feel that danger. And I know that many people have told me, oh, if I've had that experience, I would be telling it immediately and sharing it. And I understand why they might feel like that. But for me, it was so, it felt that I needed to deserve it. I don't know how to say it. I didn't even know why I was having all those visions until I understood that it was for me. And that was several months already of visions before I was able to say, oh, okay, this is for me. Now I can take it from this place.
In the book, you described two kind of archetypal figures that serve as guides for you, the ageless woman and the shepherdess. How do you understand them? How do you understand the differences between them and what they each showed you? They showed you different things. So maybe you can say a little bit about what they showed you and how you understand them as kind of individual archetypes.
Yeah, thank you for that question. For me, the ageless woman, as I said before, is the embodiment of the cosmic feminine. It's the essence of love and consciousness expressed through matter, and matter in every single level of density, from the soul level, which is really refined, to the most dense level as a rock. While the shepherdess, for me, is a woman intermediate between that essence and me, and the women of today. She's a woman that had a life, that she saw things, that she knows things about consciousness, about the history of the world, about the future of the world. She's a storyteller also. She's a shepherdess and a storyteller. She has those two functions. And she's like the bringer of the future for me, a clearer vision of the future. It's through her that I see it. And I say that it's in relationship to me because it was the three of us that are all the time in this relationship. And my function was kind of the person that doesn't know a lot about of anything and is trying to understand what is happening and trying to really become in contact with these two archetypal figures and forces in themselves. And the shepherdess for me is like that middle ground, that middle space between me and the ageless woman could meet. For me, the ageless woman is the source of love, is how love manifests and how consciousness manifests in all creation. But the shepherdess is the one that shows me the human dimension of how that can actually take place, how we as humans can become the shepherds of a new world, actually, the mother, the embodiment of a new world.
Wonderful. That's very helpful.
Yeah, thank you. So you receive this like very powerful, direct teaching or transmission. And then you describe in the book that it took quite a bit of time and work to integrate, that the experience itself left you highly sensitive, and that it took work to integrate this experience that from all accounts seems like it kind of blasted you open in terms of your psychic capacities and just overall sensitivity. And so at this point, you've been teaching some of what you've learned from these visions and sharing about the feminine and sacred feminine wisdom. And I'm wondering if you can explain a little bit how you've translated your own direct experience, both into a maturation process for yourself to be able to integrate it for yourself in your own life, but also how you've been able to share the teaching and kind of the basic points of that teaching. What are you hoping to share with people when you teach, or when somebody might read this book, which I highly encourage? Just it's not possible in this kind of a format to give the richness and directness that reading the actual accounts of these visions does. And so, yeah, I'm wondering, where has that come to at this point in terms of your own teaching and what you're hoping to share with the future, with humanity currently?
When I teach, I don't talk about the ageless woman or the shepherdess. I don't want to use them. So I use my own experience. Usually the people that I work with, they have all read the book by now, but when they weren't, I always spoke to the heart of the person that is the receiver. One of the things that I learned from these two archetypes is that the only way of communication is when you give the other in the language and form that the other can receive. And that is one of the wonders of the feminine, its capacity to create forms and more forms and infinite ways of forms in which life can manifest and show us something. There's not just one way. There's not just one path. It's the path of the heart of the person that is the receiver. And what I can give the other is a relationship. Is when we enter in relationship, when we can experience what we have in common. One of the things that I think that I've learned is that we are all individuals, but on one level, we're all equal. So I try to break this idea of the teacher and the student or above and below, so that we can start growing together as a companionship in which I learned from the other, and the other one learns from me. It's an exchange, like life is. We are always learning from each other, whether we know it or not. And it's not just by words, it's by actions, by the feelings. So what I try to bring is consciousness of all the things that we put outside ourselves, how they actually are happening inside and how they are manifesting. So even when I have worked with groups of fairly large groups, 200 people or even more sometimes, what I do is not something that I do on purpose, but I kind of feel the place and feel the need of that moment. And I express into that. So I'm very fluid in a certain way. What I receive from others is the sense that I never make them feel like they are less than me. Because again, one of the feminine things that I learned is that an apple tree and an orange tree can grow next to each other, and they are different fruits, but they are both perfect. So that's the sense that I try to transmit. I think that one of the things that I, as a student, and other people, when they come to work with me, there is this sense that there is something wrong that they need to fix. I felt it myself. And actually, I felt from some of my teachers an encouragement onto that place of being not enough, of being that there is something wrong. And I believe that in order to heal, we cannot bring all that until we are somewhere a little bit healed, somewhere a little bit stronger. When people come in that sense of pouring their heart, pouring their soul, it's a great responsibility. So what I build is almost like a nest around them, like a place where they can start calling home within themselves. And it's not something that I tell them, it's something that I try to build, this kind of heart connections, this sense that they are okay. And then from that they're okay, they may see things that, what is the next step? What do I need to work on? What is one thing that they feel that they need to grow? So that from that place, I start developing like larger branches and roots, like if a person were a tree, expand onto that. But the first thing I always naturally do is to make them feel that they are okay, that they are contained, that they are respected. And the reason that I say this is because we as teachers, on one level, we have a great responsibility, but at the same time, it's the greatest temptation. It's so easy to hurt somebody, to abuse that energy that we receive, that dedication, that love. The feminine taught me that I need to pour my love so that the other can start to understand love from a place of full acceptance and respect, and releasing the other as a manifestation of God. That is the other thing that I learned from the feminine, that everything is a manifestation of the divine. And if I can see the divine in somebody else, then that person, that soul, see itself sometimes for the first time as whole, as pure love and pure consciousness, which is what I believe and what I see souls as being. So I don't see people as they see themselves. Usually or always, I see them as souls. From the level of the soul, I don't really see them from the level of the personality.
If you're enjoying the episode, please consider subscribing to our Patreon to help support the production of the podcast.
Subscriptions begin at $1. All patrons receive access to bonus content, curated resources, and exclusive patron events, including live Q&As.
For more information, please check out the Patreon link in the show notes, and thanks for listening.
Thank you for that. One of the things that I've been wondering about is So much of the book is in the language of the sacred feminine and teaching us to remember about the sacred feminine. And that's obviously really important for us in our society. And the reclamation of the feminine is so important to how we deal with the earth and our bodies and women. But one of the things that I've been wondering is, how do we understand the sacred feminine in relationship to this sacred masculine? How is this message being given in a way that would help us understand the sacred masculine as well?
The feminine, as I saw it, is beyond really what we usually understand as feminine and masculine. The reason that it has to be called feminine is because in this plane of reality where we have masculine and feminine, it is the feminine, is what we call the feminine. But the reason that I always say that is a cosmic feminine is because it was beyond what we normally understand as masculine and feminine. I think that both of them together is what is needed right now to bring a new consciousness of oneness in the world. If we don't integrate ourselves in our masculine, our feminine energies, there is no way we can actually survive what we are experiencing right now, the division that we're experiencing that right now. One of the things that I observe a lot is that it gets mixed up in our consciousness what is the essence of the feminine and how the feminine manifested in the last 3,000 years with a patriarchal phenomena. The patriarchy, from my perspective, is not the masculine, the real masculine. The essence of the masculine is, again, from my perspective, a kind of consciousness in which it is separation, in which it is detail, in which it is extreme differentiation and exclusivity and individuation. So there are many wonderful things. But what happened in the last 3,000 years is the degradation of the feminine and degradation of the masculine. So when we talk about the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, we're not really talking about how the feminine and the masculine are understood today. And because of that, it creates a lot of mixed up and misunderstandings because there is so much pain on both sides, because the patriarchy did not only hurt women and the earth, it also hurt men quite a bit. The sensitivity in men got spanked in a certain way. Men couldn't express their feelings, they couldn't be sensitive, it couldn't sometimes even be very artistic. Everything that would have been the essence of the feminine in a man got hurt, got demoted, so got abused. So today we need to separate what is the essence of these two archetypes, from my perspective, from the reality and the pain that we feel around it. And I think that part of my work is to differentiate these levels of manifestation. From that perspective, I think that today the role of the sacred masculine is tremendously important, because this feminine has the capacity to create a new world of togetherness, but it's the sacred masculine that needs to bring the protection, like the external protection, the walls, so that this feminine creation that is almost a baby today, this new world that is being born as we speak, is a baby today. It needs a frame, it needs a support, it needs a help, it needs a protection. And it's like in life, when you see two birds, a mother and a father, the mother is going to be protecting the eggs, but it's the father then goes and looks for the food, the ones that brings the external protection, the one that if there's an attack from another bird or from a stone, something that falls, is the male that is going to come and protect the nest. This is the same from my perspective, from the perspective of consciousness and the perspective of the creation of a new world. Having said that because I say this, is the source of the conflict, because for a lot of women, or for a lot of misunderstanding of the feminine, is they confuse independence with needing this protection of the nesting ground. And there is a very fine line at that point that needs to be walked, how both forces within ourselves can continue to live independently, be whole, and at the same time be together. This is the moment in which this is starting to happen. And that's why on a group level, I sometimes say that we are not still ready for the sacred masculine. It's not because we are not ready, but it's because it's still on an individual level, from my perspective, that you can start to integrate these forces. Then on a partnership, maybe on small communities, but on a collective level, I think that there's still this deep anger, in particular in the feminine of 3,000 years of having been devalued, that they are still trying to come to terms with. So a lot of my work is to transform that anger into pain and into forgiveness, into heart understanding, into an openness, into a feminine that can actually build. One of the things that I learned from the feminine is that with love we can build, but with hatred we can only destroy. And if we destroy this new world that we are trying to grow at the moment, to develop, cannot survive. And you see it in the history of mothers growing children through anger rather than through love. And you see what the results are in many of those cases. Historically, you can see that. So I don't know if I'm being too clear. What I see is like a thin path in which those two forces can actually start building something together. And right now, it's a very subtle way in which it can be done, because there is still a lot of upheaval.
That's really, really helpful. It made me think of our colleague, Reverend Tandeka, who's written on racism, being a Black woman in America. And she wrote very beautifully on racism that that's a distorting system which cripples and distorts everyone in the system. So that racism doesn't just affect, those that are being oppressed, but the system itself cripples and distorts even those that are oppressing. And so the whole system is bad. And it makes me think in this context that here, when you're using sacred feminine, it's not another dualism. Sacred feminine here is the correction or the thing to be remembered in the middle of patriarchy. And patriarchy is the distorting system here. And so since we've been living so long with this patriarchy that's been distorting how we understand ourselves in relationship to the planet and in relationship to our own bodies, the sacred feminine is the kind of holism or holistic remembrance that will heal. And so I think this is really wonderful language. So in some ways, sacred feminine is an answer to the disease of patriarchy.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it. That's why I said this feminine was cosmic, was not really the feminine or the masculine as we understand it at the moment. It's really the one force that knows oneness in a very concrete way, in a certain way.
In all of this, I'm very curious how one might walk a path of feminine wisdom, or in your own experience, having had this very powerful, visionary, mystical experience, seemingly outside of a context of a spiritual tradition or context in which you had a spiritual community and or teachers to help you make sense of it. My own sense of it is almost as if the planet itself, as you speak in the book, is awakening, and it tapped you on the shoulder and said, it's time. And yet, without that context, how did you work with it and make sense of it. And now, what does it mean for yourself, but also for your students, for instance, to walk this path of remembrance, following the kind of wisdom that was revealed to you? And I appreciate the potential difficulty in speaking to it, because you've already noted that part of the feminine wisdom is the attention to uniqueness, and that maybe an apple tree walks a different path than an orange tree, but it's the perfect path for each one respectively. And so is there a way to articulate that path? Are there certain practices that you advocate? Or when it really comes down to the nitty-gritty, we all are in a developmental process, and usually a huge part of a spiritual tradition is creating a context for that development to hopefully happen healthily and fully. And so how do you see that path unfolding following this feminine wisdom?
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. The feminine is about receptivity in many ways, and it's about beingness. That means that the actions of the feminine do not sprout as a reaction, but actually from within. And that is the essence of most traditions. What they teach you is how to go in order to find the core of yourself and how to manifest that externally. The essence of being is not doing, but rather the action that comes out of the non-being of the receptive state, of the non-being. The action that comes is a response that comes from the heart, not as a kind of counter to what is coming from outside. And that I see it as the essence that I have seen in Sufism, in Christianity, mystical Christianity, even in Zen meditation. When I started practicing, they all lead you inward because we are completely projected outside. The way we see the world is really as a mirror. We are all projecting outside to be able to understand the within. So all this spiritual path, what they teach is to go within so that you can see the within and then reflect it outside. It's like the way radiance work. Radiance work from within out. Otherwise, it comes from outside and it's like a ping pong game. You throw a ball and then the ball comes back with the same speed that you threw it. So you keep on living within the opposites. The way I see the feminine is living from within, and there is no opposites in the within. In the within, there is only oneness. There is always this silent space from where life sprouts, and then it expresses in many ways. Once I had these visions, I spent 15 years learning about dreams for different spiritual and psychological traditions, in order to fully understand what I had experienced, and also to differentiate the different kinds of dreams and spiritual experiences and mystical experience, what was and what was not. In that process, I did have a dream. I'm not going to go over the whole dream, but at one point I understood that the soul had something to learn. It had a mission to learn something in this plane, but it could be fulfilled in many different ways. I always had thought that there was only one way, because I saw the artist, for example, and it's true, the artist, sometimes a doctor, sometimes a teacher, they have that destiny so marked. But for most of us, we can fulfill our mission from wherever we are in life. And that is what I think that is the main message also of every true tradition, to find the essence of the person and help them flower and blossom from whatever their true essence is. Now, one of the beauties for me of these visions were that they didn't have a particular spiritual path, as you have said. And in the beginning, I didn't understand it because I was coming from Sufism and mystical Christianity, and I could see that many of the teachings could be placed within those traditions. I didn't know much about them. I learned much later. But I knew a little bit about it, and I could see that some of those messages could be placed in particular in Sufism. But then I realized why it wasn't like that. And the reason was that today we are entering into an area what we call interspirituality, interreligious dialogue, the interworld. And what I was being shown is that the essence of the feminine is intern, is the capacity to interconnect. So what I had to see and to be shown was how that interconnection happens and how we all have a little part, no matter if we are in a particular path or another. Because in the end, if you are in a true seeker, you will find that space within oneself. And sometimes it happens that whatever your essence is, you can actually completely feel fulfilled and content within a certain path. And sometimes you find yourself that actually you can take from more than one path, or you can see connections that belong not just to one path. And you have that right again yourself, because we are all individuals, we're all expressions of the divine. So just as a tree, an apple tree and an orange tree have each one their own kind of fruit, we have that as well. We can be trees, we can be people, we can even belong to a spiritual path, but we can be both fine. One of the things that for me today, the patriarchy has done is this divisiveness that we have between the paths. And it's created so much anger, so much difficulty, so much doubt, and so much insecurity in us. So much insecurity. Are we in the right place? Are we not in the right place? Is my teacher the best teacher in the world or not? Am I better as a person because my teacher is greater? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? That is what makes us weak, what weakens our soul, because our souls are so wise. I think that if we can find that voice within, we can all start walking a different kind of path. So techniques, as you maybe are asking, I propose meditation, a lot of introspection, a lot of going within, a lot of finding meaning in what you're doing right now. In particular, if you think that there is no meaning, I try to find the meaning. Because again, what I see happening is that because of these thousands of years of training, we believe that we're not good enough most of the time. And while there might be many things that we can get better, and we should try to get them better, we cannot feel so weak and so destitute and so lack of power to feel that tremendous weakness that comes from the feeling that we are not enough, that there is always something wrong with us. I think that to really be able to give to the world what we have come to give, we need to feel that we have something to give. And of course, we don't want the ego to get involved, but we can work with the ego while serving. In my particular training, I suffer from that because I was not allowed to do anything for 10 years before I was told to teach. And there was a long period of that in which I felt that there was so much wrong with me because there was nothing I could do of service. And it was something that I swore that I would never do to others. I think that we all have something to give, even if it's something really small. And my job that I learned from the feminine is to bring that out, to allow somebody to feel that their service is service, that they have something to give to the world. And while they do that, we can look at the ego and we can look at the limitations that do not allow for that gift to flow as it should flow. And we all have like rocks on our path that do not allow for a flow to be given to the world as it should be. And we have to work on that while we give our gift. We are here to give our gift to the world. That's the one thing I truly experience and I truly feel.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so it sounds like in the teaching you received, but just in your own feeling of it, interspirituality is a movement in the direction of this new earth that you saw and experienced, and the kind of possibility for the coming together of humanity and ultimately all of life. I was personally very struck by a chapter in which you talk about the weaving together of all of humanity's wisdom. And I'm wondering if, to give our listeners a sense both of your own experience, but also the book, that I think we would all highly encourage people to read, because it really does go into a lot of depth that we're not able to cover here. I'm wondering if you could read a little passage about that, given that here on this podcast, we are very interested in the place where cultures meet and wisdom meets, and specifically around religious and spiritual traditions, and how this kind of collective wisdom of the earth, all of our religious and spiritual traditions, they're all earth traditions. They've all sprouted here on this planet. So in a way, it's all the collective wisdom of the earth. And you speak to this kind of vision of, even beyond a teaching or a tradition belonging to a specific culture or peoples, more fundamentally, different peoples and cultures and civilizations all belong to the earth, and the wisdom that they bring and cultivate also belongs to the earth, and even decomposes and is recycled into the layers of the earth. And so earth is becoming more and more wise and conscious and realized, if we can say that, through our collective realization. So I'm curious if that's resonant, if I understood that kind of properly from my reading of the book, but also if you would be willing to share a little excerpt.
Yeah, thank you. I think that you grasped beautifully the book. Thank you for saying that. We are the consciousness of the earth. Yes, we are the eyes of the earth. We are the consciousness of this realm. And that's why we have such responsibility. I'm going to try to summarize a few of the paragraphs so that they can maybe have an idea of what I'm saying. The scene starts that we are in a place called the place of remembrance. Is this what you're referring to?
Yes.
So the shepherdess says, here the past and present interweave to generate and bring meaning to our today and our tomorrow. Here we remember ourselves, who we are, what we came to do. Here, in this very place, are told the feasts of our ancestor, feats that guide us, each one of us, in our present day. And then she starts telling a legend. A legend says that in order to remember, our ancestors decided to investigate the history of their people, cultures, and traditions as far as they could reach into the past. They stamp all the facts they discover onto pieces of white linen cloth. Then they did the same with the history of the planet and the universe, and decided not to hide information from one another or distort the truth, no matter how difficult or painful. When they knew their story and their path they had walked, they realized they had made great mistakes, and they almost destroyed themselves and the planet. So they wept for a long time and repented. After a long period of contrition, they asked for forgiveness, and they were forgiven and forgave themselves. And forgiveness was found in valuing all their experiences, both positive and negative, as part of a necessary learning process. They chose to unite all the knowledge they had acquired with what they called the golden thread of existence, sewing together and arranging all the pieces of the white linen, which was stamped with all the common details or characteristics of their stories. Soon our ancestors realized they could continue combining those groupings of informations in new ways, and they began to unite the pieces of cloth into larger and larger units. It was then noticed that the borders of the pieces of the linen cloth, those separate pieces of material sewn with the golden thread, began to dissolve into unity until one could not really tell they had ever been separate. Thus, all the pieces eventually became one single piece of fabric. Without their knowledge, they had discovered the formula to dematerialize matter. With this new fabric, they made a magnificent garment that radiated golden light, and they called it the suit or garment of remembrance. This garment belongs to all of us, and though no one wears it, all of us know that part of our story exists in it. We know that our actions will remain stamped onto the fibers of its cloth, so that we may remember our connection with everyone and everything, and not forget the function we have come to perform. Our ancestors discovered their siblinghood with all the beings of the earth. They knew, as human beings, that they were the eyes and the ears of the planet, the awakened consciousness of creation on earth, and that their mission was to love, care for, and protect the world and its beings.
Wonderful. If I could, I want to add just another passage from near the end of the chapter. And this is just such a gorgeous passage and embodies so much of what I think is being suggested we're here to do. And so it says, the ageless woman adds, the vocation of the bearers of remembrance is to bear witness to and affirm the presence of the sacred in the world. Their job is to bring awareness to a living universe that does not know itself. It is to contemplate the sunrise for a sun that does not know it dawns, to admire the grandeur of the mountains for a mountain that does not know its majesty, to appreciate the perfume of the flower for the flower that does not know its own perfume. It is to grateful experience the paradise of the earth for an earth that does not know she is a paradise. Beautiful.
I'm wondering, Alejandra, if you can just share a little bit of how you do see kind of this legend, which is obviously more than just a mere legend, and how it relates to interspirituality.
Yeah, I think it is completely that. It's just the interconnection of everything, the revaluing of all of life is to finding connections where connections have been broken. It's really to go back to a sense of oneness, a sense of unity of the whole of creation, in which, as I said before, we are all individuals, we're all independent things, but we're all connected. We have all this common thread, this essence that we share. And by doing that, the way I saw this particular legend, I saw it in many different levels. On the level of the individual, it means to integrate all our parts and to be able to become whole, to become one in oneself. On the level of a family, of a community, is also to see the value of each one of the different individuals that belong to that community, to value the gifts that each one of them can actually bring, and to see how they all thread together into building the essence of that community, how they are all really one. But to do it consciously, because, for example, little babies, they do have that sense of oneness with the mother or with the caretaker. But what I'm talking about is a sense of oneness that is conscious. And for that, talking about what Natalia talked about, the sacred masculine, we do need the sacred masculine, because the sacred masculine is the one that can still see the individuality within that unity. Because the feminine, what perceives is the oneness, is the relationship of all things, but is the sacred masculine as a consciousness that can understand the different parts of that oneness, the different individual qualities that form that greater oneness. So from the level of consciousness, I see it as extremely important. In the world, we see it together now with all this, not just spiritual, but all dimensions of the creativity and expression of humanity becoming more and more together. Doctors Without Borders, the United Nations. And in spirituality, I see it in interspirituality, in interspiritual dialogue, in interreligious dialogue. And I think that the difference from the past is that in the past, you would find either small communities or individuals that naturally understood the oneness and were able to integrate different aspects of life and bring them together into a new path or into a new tradition or into a new concept of life. Today, this has become global, in part through the internet, in part through the means of communication. We have the direct experience of being together and of sharing things with people we don't know, to understand our pain in ways that we never understood it before. We understand hunger, we understand abuse. So many things have now coming to the light thanks to this interconnectivity that we are experiencing. And the same is happening in spirituality. And I believe that one of the beauties of interspirituality in this sense is that we can start seeing life as spiritual. We can start living everyday life as a spiritual experience. And I'm not saying making everything into spiritual. No, I see the opposite. By finding the meaning of everything that we do in life, we are bringing spirit into our lives. And by bringing meaning into our lives, so we're making our life a spiritual event every single minute, because we're seeing the meaning and the divine in everything we do, in everything we feel, in everything we see around us. There is a saying in Sufism that says, wheresoever I turn, I see the face of the beloved. And this is really the experience of the feminine that is trying to bring, is the seeing the divine, the seeing the sacred aspect of life everywhere around us. And I think that's what really interspirituality is seeking, and the world is really seeking.
Yeah, now I'm stuck because I was like, yeah, wow. um, I guess I do have one more question before we close here. If you were to pinpoint one aspect of the teaching that you've received that is unique, maybe, compared to other spiritual religious traditions, what would you say that is, if anything? Or even if not totally unique, because there's a lot of resonance, with a lot of sacred traditions. What do you think is particular about this orientation of the sacred feminine that is different from maybe mystical Christianity or Sufism?
I think that in the essence it's not different, but one of the things that has caused people, in particular women, to take on is when I say that the feminine is love, that creation is love incarnated. It's very difficult because the feminine has been damaged. So the one thing that we do not believe deep inside is that that can be true. The feminine, in particular in the Western world, has been, in particular women, has been seen almost as representative of Eve, of bringing paradise down and having to live in this planet of exile in which nobody wants to stay and we all want to run away. And actually, the fact that it's sometimes so difficult for people to live spirituality in everyday life is because everyday life is not sacred. So we have to go to a mountain, we have to leave the world or leave the body to be able to have an experience of truth, when in reality, the feminine is the veil of truth. That's what I was shown, that the meaning is all there, it's just in the way of form. So to believe that truly we are made of love, that we are a manifestation of love, our very bodies are love, that's why we can caress, that's why when we see something, we can see the beauty, the wonder. All that is so difficult. It's so difficult for us. And I think that sometimes the idea of putting God outside only, not just God inside and outside, but God outside only, has the danger that we cannot see that wonder that we are as human beings, that we are as creation. We cannot see it in ourselves. That's why when I work, I look for the one thing that they can feel good about themselves. It's because I need to start growing within each person a sense that they are sacred. But it cannot be a belief system. It needs to be an experience. Because when you believe, what you're doing is actually postponing reality. You're just creating another veil. So you need to experience your purity. You need to experience your goodness. You need to experience your deservedness. You need to experience who you are as a soul. And then you can start seeing that around us, because the reason that we project so much outside onto others is because we cannot love ourselves. We cannot even see who we are. And that is a great thing that I think the feminine does. When it's properly done, the feminine can bring you back to the sacredness of yourself, not as an ego trip, but actually as a truth of your essence.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's helpful to hear. So it's been so lovely to hear you share with us and share with our listeners. I'm wondering if, to close us out, as is our tradition now, if you have a poem or a song that you'd like to share with us and send us off with, that'd be lovely.
Thank you. Yes, I have two very short ones from Hafiz, both of them. I love Hafiz. The first one is, I have learned so much. It says, I have learned so much from God that I can no longer call myself a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Jew. Truth has shared so much of itself with me that I can no longer call myself a man, a woman, an angel, or even a pure soul. Love has befriended me, Hafiz, so completely. It has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind has ever known. This is from The Gift, the book translated by Daniel Ladinsky. And from the same translator, laughing at the word two. Only that illuminated one who keeps seducing the formless into form had the charm to win my heart. Only a perfect one who is always laughing at the world too can make you know of love.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Shout out to friend of the show, Treefort of Golden Turtle Sound, for producing the intro and outro music and assisting with mixing and mastering. Be sure to check out his awesome music and hit up Golden Turtle Sound for any of your audio engineering needs.